Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are sifting through a source that presents well, a truly challenging and controversial statistical analysis. We're doing a deep dive into the spiritual health and, I guess, the moral trajectory of the Professing Protestant Church here in the USA, specifically focusing on evangelicals.
And this source it's highly critical. It combines statistics and theology to make a really stark argument.
It is. The central claim is that the American Union has, and this is a quote, succumbed to the Luciferian agenda to destroy it from within.
Which, in the author's view, has led to a great apostasy.
And the really shocking conclusion they present, and we'll spend a lot of time on this, is that only about 3% of the core evangelical population actually adheres to what they call fundamental biblical tenets.
Yeah, that 3% number is staggering. And it's really critical that we, understand the framework the author uses to even get there. They connect history, statistics, prophecy. It's all built on a few key theological concepts.
Like what?
Well, first, the idea of spiritual compromise. Then there's the parable of the field, the wheat, and the tares. And finally, the relevance of the book of Revelation's 7 churches. They see the last one, Laodicea, as a prophetic mirror for our time.
Okay, so that 3% is the target. But to see how they built that case, we need to go back to the beginning, to the historical foundation they lay out.
Right. They start with America's founding.
The document claims the USA was originally founded on, sound biblical principles, but it pivots immediately. It alleges that the nation was secretly undermined from the very start.
By Luciferian anti-Christian people is the term they use.
Exactly. And they cite Masons, specifically, as an example of what they call a false correlating vein of supposed Christianity.
And this has been, in their view, compromising Protestant churches since 1776.
So, not a new problem.
Not at all. And what's fascinating is how they use historical praise to show just how far things have fallen. They bring up Alexis de Tocqueville.
From Democracy in America?
Yes. He admired the stability of American life, and he credited it directly to the popularity of the churches and the strength of the traditional family.
So the source uses that to say, look, the foundations were once strong, which makes the decline they're documenting feel even worse.
Exactly. It sets the stage for a more direct charge about what's happening today.
And this is where it gets into what some might call conspiracy theory. The source claims there's a sinister hidden agenda at play right now,
aimed at usurping both the church and the government.
So what's the evidence they're using to tie this to the present day?
This is a key point for them. They point directly to Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals.
The one famously dedicated to Lucifer.
That's the one. And they draw a direct line from that book to Hillary Clinton's master's thesis, which they note was based on it.
So for the author, this isn't just theory. This is presented as concrete proof of a long-term strategy playing out in public.
And the causal link here is everything to their argument. They're saying the compromise is now complete because the influence is flowing the wrong way. It's not the church changing society.
It's society changing the church.
Yeah.
The church has become a mirror, not a lamp.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So this idea of compromise, it needs a spiritual explanation, and that's where the source brings in the parable of the field, right?
Yes, to explain the context. What's the difference between the wheat and the tares? The true believer versus the compromised one.
So remind us, the parable is about a good farmer who sows wheat.
The good seed. And then an enemy comes at night and sows tares, the bad seed.
And the key for the source's diagnosis is how they interpret the fruit of these two plants.
Right. The tares, they explain, look almost identical to wheat, but they produce no kernel fruit, and crucially, they stand completely erect.
Which they connect to pride.
Yes, a symbolic connection. The wheat, on the other hand, has lots of kernel fruit, and because of that weight, it bends downward.
Which they see as humility.
Exactly. The physical plant becomes a spiritual identifier. Prideful mimicry versus humble truth.
And this whole analogy, this spiritual evaluation, it ties directly into the prophetic timeline the author is using.
It does. They connect it straight to the book of Revelation, where Jesus is seen as a physician checking the fruit of 7 church ages.
Ending with the Laodiceans.
Which the source argues is a perfect description of the Western Protestant church today.
And their analysis of Laodicea is pretty bleak.
It really is. The source interprets the Greek name to mean Jesus is literally voted out of the assembly. Their condition is seen as so bad that Jesus only calls out to individuals within that church to repent, not the whole body.
So the picture they're painting is of Jesus standing outside the door of his own church.
That's the framework. And it provides a really sobering context for the numbers we're about to get into.
Okay, so this is where the theology meets the statistics. Let's dive into the hard numbers they use to back up this claim of widespread apostasy.
Most of it comes from a 2020 Cultural Research Center survey, along with some other polls.
And the first red flag they point to is with the younger generations, millennials specifically.
Yeah, this is a big one.
They cite data showing that only a shocking 2% of millennials hold what the source defines as a biblical worldview.
Even though a majority, 61% of them, still identify as Christian.
And that 2% is the lowest of any adult generation.
Now, if we narrow the focus to the group they're most concerned with, evangelical Protestants,
Which they estimate is around 70 million people.
a huge group. The polls they cite suggest only 3% of this core group reports believing in the specific tenets the author requires for a literal interpretation of the Bible.
We should probably list what those are. I mean, these are the specific belief markers that get you into that 3%.
It's important. They list a literal belief in the Genesis creation account, the flood, the Exodus, Jesus and his miracles.
The resurrection and rapture, a 7-year tribulation, and the physical return of Jesus.
If you don't hold to all of those, literally you're considered part of the compromise in this analysis.
So let's do the math that the source uses. It really shows the scale of what they're claiming.
Okay.
They take the total Protestant population, about 145 million. They figure the conservative half, the evangelical core, is about 73.5 million.
And 3% of that?
3% of that is only 2,205,000 people.
Just over 2 million people who they'd say hold to those traditional literal beliefs.
Which brings us to this really shocking analogy they use to help you visualize it. If you take those 2.2 million core believers, the 3% remnant, and spread them evenly across all 50 American states,
You'd have about 44,100 Christians per state.
that's the population of one medium-sized town. A single town's worth of what they call true Bible-believing evangelicals scattered across an entire state.
Wow. And to make it even simpler, they offer this proportional ratio. It really drives the point home.
Okay, what's that?
Imagine 100 Protestant Christians in a room representing the whole 145 million.
Right.
Out of those 100, the source claims 50 are essentially left of center. Pro-abortion, anti-Israel, pro-LGBT, and so on.
Okay, so half are gone. That leaves 50 who identify as evangelical.
Exactly. But even within that remaining group of 50, the analysis says only 3 individuals still hold to the creation count, the flood, the rapture, all of it.
3 out of 100.
3 out of 100. That stark ratio is what they present as the evidence for the great apostasy.
That's a powerful indictment. So how did the church get here? How did it go from being Tocqueville's bedrock to this 3% remnant?
The source claims the real intensification started in the early 1990s
With what?
with the popularization of the purpose-driven life and church movement.
The author argues that this whole movement prioritized a seeker-friendly approach, which they interpret to mean one thing.
Do not confront sin.
Right. They see that as the practical mechanism for the decay, prioritizing comfortable growth over challenging biblical truth.
And the consequence, according to this research, was that the spiritual leadership was effectively handed over to, well, they used the terms Laodiceans and Jezebels.
Resulting in more mainline evangelical denominations becoming, and again, this is their very charged language, woke.
And capitulating to what they call the gay agenda. This is seen as the direct, practical fruit of that compromise.
And the final consequence of all this is what you see in the next generation.
The source claims these compromised churches essentially graduated atheists.
The numbers are pretty stark there, too. Less than 30% of Gen Z even consider themselves religious, go to church, or believe in God.
Which reflects a culture influencing the church to not be offensive rather than the other way around.
So to wrap up this section, the author synthesizes all this by pointing to 2 main compromises that Jesus warned about in the book of Revelation.
For the Protestants, it's what they call the teachings of Jezebel, which they define as full-on wokeness and sexual perversion.
And for the Catholic and Orthodox branches.
The warning is against the teachings of the Nicolaitans, which the author defines as a pharisaical and ecclesiastical disposition.
And both are presented as equally dangerous paths away from Christ at the close of the church age.
That's the argument.
So to summarize for you, the key takeaway from this deep dive is the source's central claim. The church age is ending in what they call a Christless Christianity, an institutional shell, where only a tiny fraction, just 3% of evangelicals, still hold to those core literal tenets they require.
While the vast majority have, in their view, compromised with the culture.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider, taken straight from the source material.
The author claims that those who do adhere to these end times beliefs are now supposedly on a Homeland Security terrorist watch list.
That they are watching the watchers.
So the question is, how does this perception of external surveillance affect the formation and growth of any group that's defined by its belief in coming prophetic events?
How does that 3% remnant even begin to organize when they feel they're already being treated as subversive?